Hello, my name is Laura Marecki, and this is my presentation of Case Study 17, Proud of the Strength I Had, through the scope of Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory. Before we begin the analyzation process, it's important to provide an overview of the case study. Connie is a 17-year-old girl and describes her experience dealing with abortion as a pregnant teenager. Throughout the case study, Connie reveals events from the past and draws conclusions about her choices. At 13 years old, Connie's father walked out on her family. She describes how her family never really spoke of what happened. When she was 15, she began dating Rick, who was her boyfriend for 9 months, and she discusses how he raped her. She felt as though she could not break up with Rick, as she was scared of what he might do to himself or to her, but she does admit she was addicted to the attention that he gave her. As she dated other guys, after she and Rick finally broke up, Connie reveals that she felt obligated to have sex in her other relationships, even though she objected, but she never said anything. One of the major reflections Connie had was in discussing how she never felt comfortable talking about contraception with her boyfriends. When she met Darren, she had a pregnancy scare once, and that's the first time she truly began talking about contraception, and they started using condoms most of the time. However, after they had broken up, she found out she was in fact pregnant, even though Darren wanted nothing to do with the situation besides giving Connie money to take care of it. She did have an abortion, and she had to have it in another state due to her own state needing parental permission. And she was unwilling to tell her mother about her situation. Less than a month after her abortion, Connie left for college, where she distracted herself with work. And it wasn't until 6 months after her abortion that she ended up joining a support group. And this is where she began kind of putting her energy into a more feminist movement. She began attending protests, and at one point was finally able to discuss with a fellow group member, Sarah, her experiences with abortion. Connie later reflects in her support group reasons that she believes led to her pregnancy, which include her father leaving at an early age and her insecurity in her sexual relationships. She reflects on the relationship between her mother and father, and ultimately how her father leaving had the greatest effect on her. Toward the end of the case study, Connie discloses that her pregnancy was a result of her family's inability to discuss subjects that were seen as upsetting, embarrassing, or controversial. For Bronfenbrenner's PPCT model, process is how an individual interacts with other people, objects, or symbols. And Connie had multiple processes that affected her development. The first is the interaction with her mother. Connie often discussed how she was unable to talk to her mother about the pregnancy or abortion, and how she knew that the lack of communication was having a negative effect on their relationship. Her father left when she was 13 years old, and prior to him leaving, he would come home later not at all. So she had limited positive interaction with him. She had negative interactions with the majority of her boyfriends. Rick, her first boyfriend, raped her, and she felt trapped in the relationship due to his erratic behavior. Darren, the boyfriend who got her pregnant, was into drugs and alcohol, but is the first one to bring up birth control or contraceptive measures, despite the fact that she did end up pregnant. The support group, which allowed her to experience intimacy with other women, made her further withdrawn from her family, as the people she was closest to didn't know her secrets. Although she mentions limited interactions with her siblings, her younger sister called Connie when she was away at school, worried that she might be pregnant. And although the sister was unaware of Connie's own experiences, Connie did feel relief knowing she could provide insight and be there for her sister. If we look at the person aspect of the PPCT model, there are three major characteristics to focus on. The first are demand characteristics. Connie was female, 17 years old when she found out she was pregnant, and seen as attractive to males. She mentions that she liked the attention males gave her. The next set of characteristics are resources. Some of the resources to mention was there was a lack of communication within the family, which resulted in her inability to communicate with others. She had many sexual experiences that were inappropriate due to the lack of being able to talk about contraception. She had access to an abortion support group in college, which did allow her to gain confidence, find purpose again, and experience intimacy with other women, which she was lacking with her own mother and sisters. There was a lack of self-esteem before, during, and after the pregnancy and abortion, which was due to her father's absence, her rape, and negative sexual experiences, followed by the pain and hurt from not being able to divulge her secrets to the people closest to her. The last set of characteristics are force characteristics. Connie was unhappy during her childhood and early adolescence due to her relationships with her mother and father, and the relationship that the mother and father had with each other. As the fighting and the yelling, and even her mother guilting she and her sisters when they would spend time with their father after he left. Connie was scared and uninformed during adolescence, as her sexual experiences made her feel like she was not in control. And she often felt as though she didn't have a choice when it came to having sex, as she felt she didn't when Rick raped her. However, starting as early as 7th grade, she began journal writing, and this began kind of a coping mechanism through self-reflection, as she did throughout her life experiences. Next, we have the context aspect of the PPCT model. Connie's microsystem. Her home, she was raised in a household with an unstable family dynamic where her father eventually left. She had a number of unhealthy relationships within her family and guys she dated, and she had an inability to advocate her needs. She was also unable to communicate with her mother. School was another part of her microsystem. She was able to distract herself with work. The first semester at school, she maintained a 4.0 average, despite the fact that she had an abortion a month before she left for college. She also found a support group in which she met Sarah, whom she would eventually disclose her secret to. Connie's mesosystem include the interactions between her mother and father. There was a lot of arguing early on. She reflects upon the fact that her father often didn't come home until late, and he wasn't around much to begin with. And she also discusses her mother's position on abortion, which is a huge reason why she felt uncomfortable disclosing her pregnancy to her mother. Her macrosystem, she lived in a divorced household, became a hostile environment before her father left, and also the ignorance of sexual consequences. She felt very uncomfortable talking about contraception with her boyfriends, even though she wanted to. And this could relate directly to the fact that she felt uncomfortable talking within her family. Her whole family seemed to kind of follow this lead, as they didn't like to talk about things that would upset them or cause conflict. Her exosystem includes patients at the abortion clinic. At one point, Connie discusses when she was at the clinic to have her abortion, she looked in the waiting room and saw a young girl, approximately 13 years old, and this had quite an effect on her, despite the fact that she doesn't provide more detail. I think her reflections on this allowed her to, as she looked at this girl and saw how scared she looked, I think Connie almost saw herself in this young girl that was sitting there, and wanted to reach out to her and tell her that it was going to be okay, even though she didn't have someone there to support her. For the time aspect of the PPCT model, macro time seemed to have the greatest effect on Connie. First, her inability to communicate spanned throughout her life. It started within her family dynamic, her inability to communicate with her parents about anything that might be upsetting or controversial. Her inability to communicate with her mother when she found out she was pregnant and considering abortion. The inability to communicate with her boyfriends, first about her own needs, how she felt uncomfortable having sex, although she continued to appease them, and her inability to communicate within her support group even had an effect. She felt at first as though she wasn't comfortable enough to yet share her experiences, and it took her a long time and a lot of self-reflection to realize these aspects. The second thing to mention for macro time is her inaccessibility to abortions, and more specifically the inaccessibility of abortions for teens in general. This became a topic she became very passionate about, especially through her own experiences. When she decided to have an abortion, she was unable to have an abortion in her state because it required the permission of a parent, because she was under the age of 18. And even through this process, she realized that other teens may have the same problems that she did. So this became a topic she was very passionate about. So after compiling research and analyzing Connie's adolescent development through the scope of Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory, the research found that communication between parents and adolescents is essential. The research reveals that communication within a family should provide an environment where children can learn the skills that will enable them to build healthy relationships and make better decisions. Research also found that the absence of parent-adolescent communication, especially regarding information about responsibility, education about STIs, sexuality, and contraception, can negatively affect adolescent contraceptive decision making. To conclude my presentation, I created a few questions that I thought would be great points of discussion regarding this case study, as well as what some of the research reveals. Number one, is there a connection between Connie's relationships with men and her own father's absence? Two, how can the dynamic of parental adolescent communication be improved within a divorced household? And three, what effect did the inaccessibility to abortion have on Connie, if any? Thank you very much.